Well, I'm Bowling Mercer Hitt. I was born 1927, the 22nd of February, in Rising Star, Texas. And Petie, you?
And I'm Marion Merle Woodward Hitt, and I was born August the 10th in 1925 in Stephenville, Texas.
And we met. We were both seniors at Howard Payne College in Brownwood, Baptist school there, Baptist College and university now. Uh, I'll tell you how I recall us meeting. Uh, I was walking towards the administration building, and I heard somebody call my name and looked around, and it was, I think, three girls over there. But it was Petie calling my name. Uh, I'd never met her, knew who she was when I saw her, but I'd never met her. And it was Sadie Hawkins week at Howard Payne, and so
I got to ask whoever I wanted to out that week.
she asked me for a date, and I think we went to a movie, and then it just went on from there. We courted each other that was in February, and I think about sometime in May I asked her if she'd marry me, and she said yes, and Petie was to graduate in last May, 1st of June, and I had to go till the 3rd of August to finish up, and so we decided we'd set the ceremony for the 4th of August. We got married at 9 o'clock that next morning after I graduated at her mother and dad's house on 2nd Street in Brownwood, and my dad performed the ceremony. My brother, oldest brother, Clark, Bub we called him, was the best man. And I forget the name of the bride.
It's Martha French. Her dad had worked for my dad, and she was named after my mom. And we had known each other all of our lives virtually. And we were married at 9 o'clock in the morning because in Texas in August it's hot. And so we had a swamp cooler, they call them. That was all the air conditioning you had then. And so we got married at 9 o'clock in the morning when it was more cool and more comfortable.
And I think we've forgotten to say what year this was, but it was in 1949, and we previous to this we were both going to try to teach, and we had been offered a job out at Pecos, Texas, way out in West Texas, but we had our resumes in for 2 or 3 of those oil towns in West Texas because they paid $400 a year more than the other schools did that weren't oil towns, and they kind of had to do that to get people to move out there. And so we got a call from the superintendent at Seminole, Texas, and he made an appointment to see us a couple of days later. I guess this was probably in June, and we met him at Petie's house, and he offered both of us a job, and so we said yes. And so after we got married, as I recall, our big honeymoon was we left Brownwood that morning, I think about noon, if I'm not mistaken, and we went to Big Spring, Texas, spent the night in the Settles Hotel, which is kind of an unusual hotel for a town of about 15,000 people, and it was a 10-story hotel, but it had been built back during the railroad days and is on the Texas and Pacific Railroad line, about halfway between Fort Worth and El Paso, so it got a lot of business from travelers, and it was a railroad center too. The town was. Then the next day we went to Seminole and got a room there in the only motel in town, and went and talked to the superintendent and the principal that we were going to work for, and started looking for a place to live, and we found, well, the guy that taught shop in high school, he and his wife was secretary to the I believe the junior high principal, and he'd bought a little old place down in not a very good part of town and kind of fixed it up, and he said it was going to be ready by the time of school, and so we looked at it, and boy, the thing was tiny. It had a room you couldn't, the living room you couldn't walk, two people couldn't walk by the sofa at the same time, and between it and the wall, and then a little old tiny kitchen, and then a bedroom that was a little bit bigger, a bathroom, that's all. It kind of looked like a chicken coop, but it was clean, and we lived there for over until the spring of the year, and then the school had built about 7 or 8 bungalows up not too far, about 2 or 3 blocks from the school, because they had to get that people out there. There just wasn't places for rent. The oil workers rented everything, so they had to provide some housing for people, or they couldn't have teachers, and so somebody moved out and quit the job or something in the spring, and we got to move in to one of those, which was a little bit nicer and a little bit larger, and but there's just little frame bungalows, one bedroom, one small living room, kitchen. And
We lived.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we lived in Seminole, and that's where Maureen was born.
She was born the following September, the 2nd September that we spent there.
And then Bach was born the following October, and then that.
Not that October.
No, but the next year.
Okay. When I got married, the day or two before I got married, I had one $25 saving bond that was worth, I think, $17.75, and I cashed that in. That's all the money I had.
But my dad gave us a car, an Oldsmobile.
Your dad gave us a check, or gave us $500. It wasn't a check.
But that, I was going to say that. And,
Yeah. And it's your mother.
okay, it was Mother's car that they
She
gave.
gave us the car, but we were going to pay for it, $100 a month for 12 months, and that we did, I think. Except I think we quit after the 11th month when Montana arrived, and then. Well, anyway, we taught. Petie taught there the 1 year, and I didn't want her to teach after that. I wanted her to stay home with the kids, or with the kid. And then we had Bach a year, 13 months after Montana, and
In both summers, we had gone to Sol Ross in Alpine, Texas, for Bolin to get his master's degree.
and I got it in 2 summers by taking a couple of courses from Texas Tech during the school year in between the two summers, and we got to spend 6 weeks of the second summer in Brownwood because I wrote my thesis on the history of hired pain, so we had to stay there for for me to do the research, and we after that I had to go back to Sol Ross for the last 6 weeks and take a couple of courses then, and that finished it up. And then I taught. Well, I taught 4 years altogether, and no need to breaking them down what they were. And then I decided I was tired of teaching. I was disappointed, and people just didn't seem to care whether the kids learn anything or not. And so I got a job with a seismograph company, a seismic engineering company out of Dallas. They had crews all over the plains area from Montana to Texas and in between, and they put me on a crew that was at Crosbyton, Texas, and we moved there, and within a month after we moved in, if I had found a place and moved in, well, they moved us to Seagraves, Texas, which was just 15 miles from where we had come at Seminole, and stayed there for 2 or 3 months, then moved to Carlsbad, New Mexico, and then back from Carlsbad back to Seagraves, Texas, and then to Glasgow, Montana, and in January. Then from Glasgow, Montana to Miles City, Montana, and then from there to Albion, Nebraska. And I think we averaged moving once every 3 months during the 2 years I worked for them. And that company's contracted to the major oil companies. We were contracted to Amerada Hess, and then their contract, Amerada Hess, canceled the contract, and so we. I had some vacation time coming. We went to Brownwood and Big Spring to see my folks, and And then they gave me a call, and they were going to send me down to work on the Texas coast, and then that fell through. So I went up to Fort Worth and got a job at Consolidated Vultee, it was then, or Convair, which now is General Dynamics, and got a job in the engineering department as an engineering writer, and so we rented a place there for about the first 2 or 3 months, and then we bought a house.
But one of the things that when we lived in we were in Miles City, Montana, when we found out we were coming back to Texas, and sort of thought we might not be with the seismograph crew much longer. And Bach and Mata Ann both, and they were like 2 and 3, wanted to know, you mean we won't ever move again? Because their whole life had been every month or 2 months or 3 months packed up and moved, and they couldn't imagine going to one place and just staying there.
We had a little 2-wheel trailer that belonged to Petie's dad that everything had a place in that trailer for us to move. And when we tarped it down, when we'd go from one place to the other, well, we put a box, a hot rod car up on the top of it, and Mata Ann's tricycle on the tongue of the trailer, and had a little red wagon that we hung on the side of it. We looked like we might be a bunch of Okies.
Well, the other thing, when we first moved to Montana and we unloaded, we couldn't find we had to live in a motel, and the motel was little log cabins. And we unloaded and put this red wagon, which was really Bach's, in the front yard. There was a fence around it. And of course, it snowed all the time. And it was freezing. I think it was 40-something degrees below zero the evening we got there. And his red wagon, after a day or two, we were settled, and he went out to get his red wagon, and it wouldn't move. He couldn't pull the handle up, to tongue up to pull it. It was frozen. And it stayed there until we moved finally in May to a house, and we finally got the wagon.
When we were in Glasgow, they didn't send the same way at Miles City. They didn't send the crew out to the field if it was 30 below zero or more. So that's how bad the conditions were for working there, man. But it is, in a way, is a lot easier than working in those sandstorms in West Texas. Is all the time we worked there was during that 7-year drought of the 50s, and I still say I've got sand in my ears from that working there. I know I haven't ever gotten it all out.
But we digressed. We were already to Fort Worth, and Bolin had gone to work for General Dynamics.
Yeah, and I worked in the engineering department on 2 or 3 projects that were connected with the B-36, and worked on the B-58, and about that time, well, no, a little bit longer than that though, they had moved me around, put me in the specifications group, and it was a way of holding on to me because they was laying a lot of people off, and because the B-58 program was dying, and they were trying for the F-111 or the TFX, and so they put me to writing the specification for the whole weapon system, which is the first time the government had ever required that, and I wrote that, which was nothing but a bunch of bull, and but we won the contract, and I'd also had worked on the nuclear program. We had a couple of had 3 reactors there, and we actually had a nuclear program, nuclear airplane program, a nuclear aircraft propulsion program, and we had a B-36 that we stuck a reactor in one of the bomb bays and put a special capsule for the flight crew up in the nose of the thing, hold 5 people, and we flew that thing. Most people still don't know that we flew a reactor over West Texas and New Mexico. I believe it was 43 flights, doing experimental stuff on radiation effects and shielding, and then I had a lot to do with security when I was on that, because they really had tight security on the nuclear program, and the guy that ran or second in command in the security department kept asking me if I wouldn't transfer out to security, and I'd turn him down a half a dozen times. And he caught me one day in the hallway there in an engineering building, and I was particularly unhappy that day, and so I said, "When are you going to arrange that for me to move to security?" And he said, "Well, I'll have it done by tomorrow." And so he got I.B. Hale was the big boss in security. He was a former FBI agent and had taught in the firearms for the FBI in Quantico for 4 or 5 years, and he'd also been an All-American tackle for TCU, well-known guy, and so he called my boss from over in engineering over there, and he was nervous Nelly anyway, and he just knew that he had done something wrong security-wise or something, and that he was in deep trouble. So he gave his permission for me to move out there. And so I worked in security then there for, I think, 7 or 8 years before they wanted to transfer me to a higher paying job or a higher position in security at the Pomona division, and I came out here and decided I'd take the job, and so I transferred out here in 1970, and
he came in February, and the rest of us, Monta and Bach and Bart, stayed in Fort Worth for Bach to graduate from high school that June, and then we drove out, and the rest of the family.
well, while you were out here, we'd bought this house.
Yeah, I flew out and spent about 3 weeks out here, and we looked at houses, and we bought this one and have been here ever since.
And the house we had in Fort Worth was just a frame house, but it was okay. And I added a big family room to it. I don't know, 5 or 6 years before we moved out here. And so anyway, I worked in security out here for 15 years, and later on, well, they started giving me. Well, the guy I worked for died about 75 after I'd come out here, and I got his job, and then they started adding more jobs to me. Gave me the medical section, gave me the safety section. See, what else did they give me? I guess just those. Anyway, when I retired in January of '86, I had about 250 people working for me, about 200 guards and about 20 firemen and about 5 or 6 safety engineers and I think 7 or 8 nurses and 3 doctors.
We forgot to say it was 1970 when we made the big move.
So I retired after 31 years with General Dynamics. So there's a lot of things that I'd like to say, like to have on this about all of our experiences in Seminole and then all with the seismograph company, but in a way I'd be kind of wasting time because we had a movie camera and so, that's the first thing that we bought when we could afford it. Once we had Monahan, you get kids and you want movies of them or pictures of them, and so I bought a little old Bell and Owl 8mm camera, which right then that was about the best one you could buy, and so we got all of that film, and a few years ago I put it all on videotape, and so it's available to the kids. And in fact, Bach's got a copy, and Monahan's got a copy, and Bart gets our copy when we go. So there's no.
Well, I think they've got it now because Hannah used to watch it too.
Well,
but it's available.
So that pretty well tells you everything that, or the outline anyway, of everything that happened since we've married, since we got out here. And then, of course, after I retired, well, we've just lived here in this house, and except for about 4 or 5 months in Tin Cup, Colorado, and I guess that'd be a good thing to back up and mention about Tin Cup. Petie had been going there since she was 9 years old, so 1935. She didn't go every summer, but they went pretty regularly in the summer. And sometimes they just camped out, and other times they were able to bum a place to stay with the Corrigans, the people from Midland, who, well, he had a lot of oil, and he also had a bunch of land in Florida that in orange groves, and owned an island off Vera Beach. Well, he was a multi-millionaire back then, but he was a friend of Petie's mother and dad, and he had a big log cabin built up there in Tin Cup. And
But we stayed with them, and then we took a pretty good sized trailer up there,
House
at
trailer.
house trailer, one summer, and then they rented places, and because my dad hunting and fishing, that was what he wanted to do. Nothing came between that.
She kept talking about Tin Cup, and I had lived in Denver for a year, so I knew all about the mountains up there, but I wasn't familiar with Tin Cup. I never been on the western slope. So one summer in 1956, we were going to meet my mother and dad. They liked to go to Colorado and camp out, and we met them at over at Wolf Creek Pass, Pagosa Springs, and camped with them for a week, and then she was going to take me to Tin Cup, and parts of Colorado don't have trees because a lot of it doesn't get enough moisture to, and especially on some of the western slope. And well, we approached. She said we weren't, but about when we turned off the paved road, got on a dirt road. Well, she said we're not but about 35 miles from Tin Cup, and man, I couldn't see a tree anywhere. And I asked her, "Is it going to be like this?" And of course, then we had to go over Cumberland Pass, 10,000 feet to get to Tin Cup. Well, I mean 11,000 feet, right? And of course, we already had been in the trees for a good while when we got to Cumberland, and trees all the way to Tin Cup. And about back up just a little bit, that her dad tells the story. They're told the story of the first time they ever went up there, and they were going to come up the river road, up the Taylor River, and her dad and her aunt, who was with her, he had his brother and his wife with him, and just the two couples, and was pulling a little two-wheel trailer loaded with camping gear. And so one of them looked at the map and said, "Well, hey,
Hazel, Aunt Hazel."
Okay," and said, "Oh, well, shoot, we can save a lot of miles just cutting across here." And of course, it was a dirt road and barely a trail at places. And they stopped in Pitkin, and the last town before you go over Cumberland Pass, and a little bitty town, and there's some guy sitting there whittling and spitting on the front porch of one of the buildings, and they stopped and asked him if that was the way to Tin Cup. He spat and said, "Yeah," and that's all he said.
He failed to say that
And
there had never been a car over it, and it hadn't been any traffic on it since they were miners traveling over it with teams.
so they had trouble. They had a little old Chevrolet, I think a 6-cylinder Chevrolet, and then pulling that trailer just loaded down. Well, they had a little trouble making some of the grades, and he actually had to get his brother out, and he'd slip the clutch and gun it and jump a little ways up, and he'd throw rocks under it so they didn't back up. And when they finally got on the top of Cumberland Pass, well, Petie's mother was hysterical, wanting to camp right up there, 11,000 feet. And of course, her dad had enough sense to not do that. And he did say something to his brother, though, said to Carlton, said, "Say something so sis won't be so nervous." And he looked off the side of the trail and said, "Man, if you jumped off here with a parachute, you wouldn't land for a week."
Needless to say, that did not calm Mom down, but when we got to the bottom and we got to the crossroads there where the town hall is, we stopped because we had to find the way to the Corrigans, and my mom jumped out of the car and stuck her face in the little stream that runs down the side of the road. And I think at that point that she was, if there's no other way out of here except the way we came, we're staying.
And the next morning, well, all the locals crowded around them to see the idiots that had come over Cumberland Pass. And they actually had taken a road that had not been used in part of coming in down on the Tin Cup side. They took a road that hadn't even been used by a wagon in probably 25 years. I don't see how they even made it down it. Well, we've really digressed now, have we? Gone back to Tin Cup. Why did I bring Tin Cup up? Why did I back up?
Well, we were talking, I don't know now, but that's beside the point. But had went back to when we got married and we're going to tell about us before we got there. And mine is shorter, so I'll tell you. But I had gone to two other schools. I had gone to TSCW, which was Texas Woman's State University, was the sister school to A&M, and I had gone there for 2 years. And then I decided I wanted to go to the University of Texas at Austin, so I went there. And every time I changed schools, I changed majors, and I was really in school having a good time, not so much getting an education. And then I decided or my parents, I think, really helped me decide that I needed to settle down. And so I came home and started to Howard Payne, determined to get my degree, which I did. And that was where I met Bolin. And before I went to school, I said I'd been born in Stephenville, Texas, which is a small town. It's just grown now. But, and I had lived in Stephenville and in Brownwood and back and forth a time or two. And then my dad, I guess you'd say he was an entrepreneur. He was always into businesses, and he started Pecan Valley Bus Line. They needed some buses between the little towns out there, and he had a bus line that for
A bus line then was not like Greyhound or Trailways. It was he had 8 passenger, some of them 10 passenger Hudson automobiles is what they were that carried the. Go ahead. I just want to put
well,
that.
and you bought them, and then he had them stretched
Yeah.
to make them big enough, and that's what I can remember earliest was we had built a house in Brownwood, and my grandparents, my dad's parents lived in Comanche, which was where he and my mom both grew up, and I was such a big girl when I was about 3 or something. I got to ride the bus all by myself from Brownwood to Comanche, which sounds really bad now, but back then I knew the bus drivers and they knew me, and it wasn't very far, and so I got to go back and forth and do that, and then then after that we moved to Hamlin, Texas, and my dad had what was called a recreation club, which was a pool hall in essence. They had pool tables and they played pool there,
And
and
dominoes.
in dominoes. And we lived there, and I went through grade school, and my maternal grandmother, whom I called Big Mama, lived in Brownwood, and I would stay and visit her sometimes. And my dad had taught me to drive a car when I was sit in his lap, and I would drive, and if I looked away, he popped my legs really good and said, if you're going to drive, drive, and if you're going to sightsee, then move. And so I could drive, and my grandmother would let me out on the road between towns, would let me drive her little car, and I was about maybe 12 years old. And I would drive and between Brownwood and Hamlin. And there was a lawyer there in Hamlin that was good friends of my parents, and he thought it was so neat that I could drive, and he would come to school and pick me up and let me take his Buick, I can remember so well, and drive around Hamlin. Of course, there weren't that many cars, there weren't people driving, and kids didn't drive, so it was really rather safe. But that made me feel like I was so big. And speaking of cars, reminds me, while we lived there, it's a term I have never heard before, but my dad floor planned Pontiac automobiles. And what that was he financed them for people that were buying cars. And that was another one of his. And we lived there until in 39. And he had gone to Tyler, Texas. And he and some friends had put in a bowling alley in Tyler, one in Longview and one in Kilgore. And so we moved to Tyler, and that's where I went to high school, and that's where I graduated from high school, was at Tyler High School. I think that about brings you up to date. To college in Brownwood.
Well, your folks all moved from Tyler back to Brownwood.
Oh, yeah.
You weren't, well, I guess you were for a month or two. You graduated from high school, Tyler, and while your dad was already over to Brownwood. That was during, well, right at the beginning of World War I. Two. And he had a lot of foresight about how things were going to go. And he went to Brownwood, and there hadn't been a yellow cab in that town since sometime about 1928 or something like that. And he got the franchise for yellow cab for nothing. And he started off, I think, with 7 or 8 permits from the city for taxi cab. And in the meantime, they were building Camp Bowie out there, which eventually reached 60,000 soldiers. And he took 2 other guys in, partners with them, and they had permits for 110 cabs, and they actually owned about 130 because during the war you had to have a bunch of extra vehicles you had to have 130 to keep 110 of them running. And he made good money. They were charging those soldiers 25 cents a ride from Camp Bowie to town, or vice versa, which wasn't much money if you look at it that way, 50 cents for a round trip. But when you had 100 of those vehicles going all the time, well, they made good money. And when the war was over, well, he was smart enough to, he said, we ought to get out of this. They're going to close Camp Bowie, and the Yellow Cab Company isn't going to be worth hardly anything. And one of his partners agreed with him, the other one didn't, and so they said, okay, we'll sell to the other partner. And he got out of that in time. As long as we're talking about that, we might as well take him on what else he did.
Okay.
After that, he helped organize the Longhorn League in baseball in West Texas, and he owned with two other fellows the Odessa franchise, and he had that team for about, I think, 5 or 6 years. And then by that time he could see the handwriting on the wall. They were beginning to get television in big places like Dallas and Fort Worth, and he saw that was going to hurt baseball, minor league baseball, because people weren't going to spend their time going to minor league baseball, which turned out to be right. Of course, it's kind of reversed itself some now, and minor leagues are doing fairly well. But he and one of his partners and Petie's mother drove to Florida and then flew to Cuba. That was before Castro, and to go down there and try to pick up some baseball players down there for that, what he was figuring on being his final year as an owner, because he was trying to win the league race that year and then sell out, and which is what they did. They didn't end up with very many players. I think there's one player from Cuba that they had, but they'd gone up to Pennsylvania, and they'd hired a guy there that had been an infielder for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and hired him as Monchek was his name, as a manager. And he located a couple of young guys that was playing semi-pro ball up there that were pitchers that were pretty good. One of them named Sokolowski, and one of them was named, what's the name?
I can't remember.
Oh, goodness. Anyway, he went on and became the Knobloch, yeah. He later on started coaching in high school, and he still holds the Texas record for the most wins for a high school baseball team. And he was also the father of Chuck Knobloch, who, when he went to the majors, went to Minnesota. Well, he was the rookie of the year that year, and then he went on and played for the Yankees for about 5 or 6 years and played second base. Didn't have much talent, but had a whole lot of get up and go and try. And he wasn't very big, for one thing. But that's really digressing. But anyway, they won the thing. He got rid of the ball club just in time, and then that's about the time of everybody and his dogs was out in the mountains and of the Rockies looking for uranium. That was during the big uranium boom, and he did a lot of aerial surveying, trying to, they had Geiger counters that sometimes you could flying low with a plane. Sometimes you could pick up something. He he staked a bunch of claims out there, but he never really got any. I mean, he may have made his money back, but that's all. But about that time, he ran in while he was out there doing that. He up in Alamosa. He ran into a guy that told him a story about there's a Spanish land grant down in northern New Mexico of 250 square miles that was owned now by all the descendants from that the guy that got the Spanish land grant, and he said, but you can't buy it. Said, everybody that I know of tried to buy some of that land. Said they won't sell. Said those you get those guys together. They had a board and about 20 or 25 people. Said they can't agree on anything, and so there's no way you could buy it. So Pop, that's like waving a red flag in front of a bull if you tell him he can't do something. So he went down there and spent about 2 years. Not mean he stayed there all the time, but he's in and out all the time. And he's making friends with those Mexicans that were on the board. And he ended up buying 49 sections, 49 square miles of land there. And then he immediately went down to the Rio Grande Valley and got a couple of brothers down there that had been irrigation farmers all their lives, and told them he had this land up there, and he didn't have to go very deep for water, and there's plenty of water, and he made them a deal, and I think he sold them 2 sections of the land for something like $6 or $7 an acre, and they'd paid $2, and but he had the understanding that they would put in a crop that year, and the crop would be available for him to come out and show people and that sort of thing. So he put in a crop, but Doug Wells put in a crop. And
potatoes.
No, they're putting in grain. He didn't have any trouble at all bringing people in there and selling the rest of it. And I think they averaged selling something like $25 an acre, and they'd paid $2, and got rid of the 48 square miles. One of his partners he had taken in the meantime kept one of them, the one that had a mountain on it, Ute Mountain. You'll see Ute Mountain on most New Mexico maps, and they called it the Ute Mountain Ranch to begin with, and then later on they put another name, Top of the World Farms, I think is what they call it. But anyway, he made good there, and so he was able to get back to giving his hunting and fishing full time, which he never did really ever let business interfere with hunting and fishing. Sometimes he did, but most of the time hunting and fishing came first. But he's a good man. He treated me like a son, and I got along with Mom good too. She didn't think too much of me to begin with. Took her a while.
Well, she thought that I was crazy because Bolin was a year and a half younger than I was, and she just didn't think that was right. But then she overcame that.
Yeah, she got over it fairly quick after we had a couple of kids. And Well, with me, I mean, you're gonna see a whole lot of contrast between Petey's life and mine. Uh, she moved around a lot, but they always lived in a nice house. I know I've seen most of them that she ever lived in, and she always had one of the nicer houses in town. And but anyway, my dad uh, was a Baptist preacher, and he started preaching when he was 16 years old over in East Texas in Smith County, where he was raised. And he went to the College of Marshall, and which was a just 2 year school at that time. So it's now East Texas Baptist University, and he then went to Baylor and got his bachelor's degree there, and he married my mother, who was raised about 10, 15 miles from Dad, and I'm not sure exactly how they met, although they were kind of shirt-tail relations. About I think they were second cousins, and Dad they got married in at Swan, Texas, and they went to they had Dad had an uncle that was a Baptist preacher, and he married him, and he had a Model T Ford, and he was in going to Southwestern Seminary at the time, and Dad and Mother were gonna enroll there too, so they rode back to Fort Worth with him that night, and they got into trouble in Fort Worth. There's streetcar tracks all over everywhere then, and they started to take a shortcut or something and got in some streetcar or railroad tracks that got hung up, and they like to never got the thing off there, and when they did, well, they'd torn the radius rod loose, and anyway, they were afraid their marriage was going to end the first night, and but anyway, they went to the seminary, and Dad finally graduated from there, and he pastored churches, like they did back then, the fourth time or half time, all around over East Texas, and after he graduated, well, I don't really know all the places that he may have pastored, but I know picking it up when I was born at Rising Star, and they moved from there about 3 months after I was born to Grand Saline, Texas, there where the salt mine is, and I don't think he was there but about 9, 10 months, and then we moved to Van Alstyne, Texas, north of Dallas, and I think we lived there about 5 years, maybe 4, and I don't remember anything before Van Alstyne, but I do remember a few things there, and I know he had, which was not that unusual in that day and time. That he we had a barn out behind our house that we lived in, and he raised chickens, pheasants, and had a milk cow, and I think he raised a hog or two there, and which back then in small towns you did that, and if you could, and then then we moved from Van Alstyne to Lancaster, and Lancaster is what I consider my hometown because I was in I didn't start school till about 6, 7 months after we moved there, and then I went to school in Lancaster every one of my years except one, which I'll explain later. But um, I, I think that it couldn't be any better town to have been raised in than Lancaster. It didn't have but about around 1,200 people in it, but I I know that when I was, by the time I was in the 6th, 7th grade, that I know I knew 90% of the people in town by name and what they did. And probably knew more about them than I ought to. And uh, it, it, uh, the way you had to live then back then, that was during the Depression, and you had to try to make ends meet any way you could. So we lived in the parsonage there by the First Baptist Church, but the parsonage had a barn, a pretty good sized barn, and a pretty good amount of land around it. And Dad always had big gardens, and we raised potatoes, we raised everything that'd grow, and Mother canned. She just seemed like she was canning something all the time, and that's what we ate. We had raised chickens, and sometimes we had a lot more chickens than we needed. She even we killed chickens and canned them, fried them, then canned them. They're not wasn't too bad, and but and then Dad. No more than they was paying him at the church. Well, he being raised over around Tyler and he's in Smith County. Well, his dad had about 10 acres of blackberries, and he'd go over there and load up blackberries with the crate. He'd take all the seats out of the car and go over there and come back with, I don't know, maybe a dozen crates of blackberries, and he'd peddle them around town. Lots of times he didn't have to really peddle them, as people knew he did that every year, and they ordered blackberries from him. And he did the same way with nursery stock. He was doing a lot of landscaping on the side that I had to help him with quite a bit. I remember helping him landscape the mayor's house, and but Dad always did something to see that we had something on the table. I can still remember when they gave him the church gave him a $2 raise a week raise from $20 to $22 a week. I thought we was in heaven, and but I didn't get candy very often when I was a kid. If somebody gave me a nickel or I worked and made a little bit of money, well, man, I always stuck them aside to get candy because I had a sweet tooth, but I just never got candy, and until I learned to put some money away myself and buy some. But Mother, she raised 6 kids and 5 boys, and one girl, some people called us 5 hits and a miss, and I was the third child, the second boy, and we like like I said, we knew everybody in town, and we the part of the churchyard at the Baptist church was we made into softball diamonds, football fields, and all the kids tended to gather around our place, and there was a good many kids in the neighborhood, and then they'd come from all over town. We'd have some really big softball games and football games there, and I enjoyed every minute of that. And then we lived there at Lancaster until Dad had received a commission in the Army, in the U.S. The Army Air Corps, as a chaplain, and I think he knew that he was probably going to get called up. It was before the war, but my sister is already in college then, and I had a brother that wasn't but a year from having to being ready to go to college, and I think he just decided that there wasn't any way on a Baptist pastor's salary that he was going to ever be able to get us all in through college, and so he was, I think, kind of happy when he'd been there at Lancaster for 9.5 years, but they called him up in July of '41, about 6 months before Pearl Harbor. And when they called him up, they sent him to Denver, Colorado, at the Lowry Field, and when we got ready to go, we'll move up there in July. Well, this older brother, Clark Jr., or Bub, we called him, he said, "I'm not going to Denver. I'm staying here." He was going to be a senior. He was the captain of the football team, the quarterback, and said, I'm gonna stay here." And so they finally agreed to let him stay with a room and board with one of the deacons who had a son who played on the football team too, and he could sleep with his Bull Brownlee, who it was, and he and Bull could sleep together. So they thought maybe Bub wouldn't get in too much trouble being there with them, and the rest of us moved to Denver. And Denver, at that time, I don't believe that there's a better city in the world than it was then. It's not now, but it was then. And I mean, they had parks all over the place. I think they had something like 250 parks, some of them up in the mountains. And you didn't have any trouble going to the park anytime and having it to yourself. And when Dad was at Lowry Air Force Base, or at Lowry Field, he preached in the first chapel that they had there, and that was where he preached all the time he was there. And later on, after the war, when Eisenhower got elected president, he and his wife was from Denver, and when he was out there while he was president, if he went to church, he went to chapel at the chapel that Dad used to preach in. And now, you know, they've closed Lowry Field down. They've got all kinds of industrial stuff, housing, all kinds of things they've made out of it. But they declared that chapel a national historical building, and it'll be like that for forever. They don't on those. They don't do much more than keep them clean. And we got a picture of that chapel that Dad preached in. That's the only place I ever heard him preach in Denver, was in that Army chapel. There's nothing spectacular about it. It was just like 1,000 other ones that they built all over the country. They had a plan that they used to build chapels, and it certainly wasn't anything compared to the one on that permanent post down at Randolph Field. Well, everything in there was permanent, and boy, they had a chapel there that it was like a ritzy Catholic church. And so I moved. I had to. They put me. I had been a freshman at Lancaster, but they put me in junior high there in the 9th grade, because they said, well, Texas has always just had 11 grades, which was truth, though they had started having 12, but they put you the first one on the front end of the school. And so I didn't have any trouble at all there with the classes. I'd always made good grades at Lancaster, but nearly all A's. But there it was. A lot of it I was repeating what I'd had at Lancaster the year before. But I was really disappointed, because I expected to go up there, and like in Texas, they had football teams at junior high, and I'd been, when I was in grade school, when I was in the 6th grade, they let me practice with in spring training with the high school football team. I mean, people that outweighed me 100 pounds, and I learned to take hard knocks there, and I just knew that I was going to get to play in Denver, and find out they don't have football in junior high. And so one day, there's a guy by the name of Stan Watson that I'd learned, had met, and he said, how about coming down this afternoon, or actually he said tonight, to City Park, and we'll play football and scrimmage against the Park Hill Pirates. And I said, what are the Park Hill Pirates? And he said, oh, it's a football team. They have a league, and it's junior high age, but it doesn't have anything to do with the schools. And I remembered then that back in 1937, I'd seen a picture of them on the cover of Life magazine. And so I said, well, what do you want to do? And go down there. And he said, I said, are they in uniform? And they said, yeah, they got uniforms. And I said, well, we're just going to do it in street clothes. And he said, yeah, which is fine with me. That's the way I was used to play, is that kind of football. We went down there and to City Park, and I'm telling you, those kids, they were the softest, sissiest kids I ever saw in my life. And I mean, here I am. I almost lettered my freshman year at Lancaster. I lacked 3/4 of play of lettering. And I was a second string quarterback as a freshman. And I'd come down out there and play with these kids. I wasn't big. In fact, this whole thing, they had to have you had to weigh a certain amount, be below a certain amount, or you had to quit. And so anyway, I get in there and decide I'll play guard there and against them. And see, the reason we did that, they didn't have enough on the team to scrimmage, and he wanted to scrimmage them. And so the first thing I did, well, I got in there and picked the guy in front of me up and threw him into the quarterback. And this is something that's really, I can't hardly believe this myself, but do you know they were trying, this is in 1941, they were trying to run the T formation. And at that time, the Chicago Bears were the only pro team that ran T formation, and Stanford was the only college team that ran T formation. And they were trying to run that. And they didn't do that bad a job, but they just couldn't handle me. I mean, I'd done every kind of work that anybody ever did by that time in my life. I don't mean I was real muscular, but I was tough. And I had played football with guys that outweighed me 100 pounds. And so after we got through scrimmaging, well, they even had a business manager, and he comes over and talks to me, and he says, "How much do you weigh?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, that's about 2 or 3 pounds over what you're supposed to weigh in the line." And he said, "But would you like to play for us if I could arrange it?" And I said, "Well, I can't." I knew they had to pay to be on the team, had to buy your own uniforms. I'd already been told that. And I said, "No, I can't. My folks can't afford to buy me uniforms and pay the dues that you have to pay." And they said, "Well, we could take care of that, all right." And he said, "If we take care of it, will you be interested?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess so." So he caught me. That was we practiced on Tuesday. Well, this was on a Tuesday, and they practiced again on Thursday. And he said, if you come down here Thursday, and I'll tell you. And so I showed up on Thursday, and he said, the board the league had a meeting, and since we'd already the Pirates had already lost the 2 games they'd played, well, they weren't worried about us winning the league or anything. So they said that you could play if you'd come down and weigh at Dave Cook's Sporting Goods downtown Denver every Thursday. And see, they had a lower limit that you had to be at the start of the year, and this was 2 weeks in it. But during the season, you could put on, I think, 6 or 7 pounds and still play. And so I was under that upper number, and so they carried me down. Oh, something else he told me. He said, the coach tells me that if I can get you on the team, that he promises he won't lose another game all year. And so we went down, weighed, and I weighed in. I'd had to do that every Thursday night. He'd take me down there after practice on Thursday and weigh. And I would not eat anything for lunch on that day and make sure I made it all right. And sure enough, that coach turned out almost right. We won all the rest of the games we had except the final of the playoffs. And we lost that one, I think, 33-17. They were the ones that's over in the poor section of town, Mexican town really, and see these richer parts of the town paid. That's why you had to pay to play on the team, is they took that money and bought uniforms for the ones in the poorer section. And so anyway, we did win the blooming thing. And there's a guy that played running back on the thing, a little Jew boy named Joe Silver, that calls me every year on my birthday. And he always says, "You were a man among boys." and, but anyway, it kind of messed me up when I went back to Lancaster. When we moved back, Dad went overseas after we'd been in Denver about a year. We moved down to Palmer Lake and by Colorado Springs because they'd moved them there for about a month, and then he went overseas to Europe, to England, and then made the invasion in North Africa. He's in Algeria and Tunisia, Morocco, and he was his commanding officer. It was the 3rd Photo Reconnaissance Group. They threw P-38s that Lockheed made. You may remember those. They essentially had 2 bodies, and but they didn't even have guns on those planes. They just flew and photographed it and did the reconnaissance. And his commanding officer was Elliot Roosevelt, FDR's, as one of his sons. And Dad got to be pretty close with him, and I think thought a good bit of him. I think maybe that helped. He wasn't overseas but a year, and they brought him back, which that's awful unusual then. But I think he knew that Dad had 6 kids and a wife at home, and so, and Dad did get quite a bit of bombing and when he's in Tunisia. But anyway, he came back and they made him a post chaplain at Randolph Field in San Antonio, which is, the west point of the air. And Mother, for that year that he was overseas, Mother and I and all the younger kids moved back to Lancaster, and Bub went to Howard Payne and on a football scholarship, and my sister went to Mary Hardin Baylor, and then I came back as a junior in high school, and somebody told somebody that we had a new coach, and somebody had told him I'd played end up in Denver, and so he decided I was going to be end instead of the quarterback, which didn't set too well with me, but I did anyway, and we had a team that really we shouldn't even been feeling a team like that. We were pretty good defensively, but offensively we didn't have any. We would have had some if our fullback John Dookie Reeves, he and Bulldog Yearout got caught shooting craps in the locker room before practice one day, and the superintendent told them that they either came in and apologized with their parents, or they were expelled. Well, Bulldog did, and John Dookie said, "No, I'm not going to ever apologize for this." And he never finished school. And he lived right across the street from me, and he and I played together all our lives. And he, I just don't know why he had to be that stubborn, but he was. And the year before, as a freshman, he had or not the year before, but 2 years before, the last year I was there, and he was a freshman. Well, and I was a freshman. Well, he had lettered as a freshman, and the year I was in Denver, well, he was playing fullback quite a bit, and I know one game, even though he was the third fullback, he scored 3 touchdowns, and but anyway, he didn't. We instead of him at fullback, they called him Baby Tank, and they had. I don't know where this guy even came from. He wasn't in Lancaster when I left, but he's there when I got back, and he was epileptic, and probably weighed about 160 pounds, and he was our fullback, and. But anyway, we did win the district that year. It's strictly on defense. Just to show you how good our defense was, I got to tell you this: we beat Richardson 6-0 one week. The next week we beat Wilmer Hutchins 6-0. The next week Richardson beat Wilmer Hutchins 60-0. Richardson should have beat us. They were inside our 20-yard line 9 times and didn't score, and mainly because of Bulldog year out. And we beat them by not by offense, but Dick Reinking intercepted a pass on the 10-yard line and ran it 90 yards for a touchdown. And then Reinking kicked off, and he was supposed to kick out of bounds, which he did, but he kicked out of bounds on the 45-yard line in the other end of the field. And do you know that when the game was over, they was on our 10-yard line again? And I think if the game hadn't ended there, they'd probably made it that time. But anyway, then next year I was quarterback next year and captain, and we won the district again. Had a lot better team than we had the year before, and see, that's something else I wanted to mention there too. That last semester of school there, I got a report card that said it was that in that class that I'd gotten a perfect grade for the whole semester. That's 3. We gave you report cards every 6 weeks, and I had 100 on each of those 6 weeks. And the guy that taught the class said that's the only perfect one ever given in the history of Lancaster High School. I kind of appreciate that. Do you know what it was? It was agriculture. It was. And I'd gotten that. That was my freshman year, really, when I got that, before I ever went to Denver. But see, that explains a lot of that, all that agriculture stuff. Me chopping cotton and me shocking grain and all that stuff that I did, and I got those hundreds, all those 3 semesters. That teacher wouldn't, if you made perfect on all your tests and your paper, the highest grade he'd give you was 85, To get to 100, you had to go out and do things that he had taught you to do. I mean, dehorn cows, castrate hogs, bud trees, all kinds of things that you need to learn if you're going to be on a farm. And everybody there was either on a farm or they were close to it. They had a cow probably, and so I did all those things all 3 weeks, 6 weeks that year, and got the 100 each time. And I don't know why anybody else never done that before, but I did do a whole lot of work, but it wasn't that I was that smart. Uh, let's see, where we then after I graduated in 44, in May of 44, well, I went to work for Sherwin-Williams paint company in Dallas in their warehouse, and me and Ralph DeBoard, a running buddy of mine, did, and he had a car, so I got to ride with him to work each day. And don't remember for sure who I was staying with. May have been staying with his folks, I'm not sure. And I didn't mention it a while ago that I had to stay there at Lancaster like Bub had that senior year because they were at Randolph. And Mother and Dad ended up paying 1 year for Bub, 1 year for me, 4.5 years for Bill, and 2 years for Parky for the room and board in Lancaster, just so we could be there to play football. And well, of course, it's a little more than that. That's where our friends were, but they I had no telling how much money they did have to spend. Although we didn't pay very much for room and board, and usually stayed with people. Well, I always stayed with people that were deacons in the Baptist church or a widow in the Baptist church. And I don't know, I think we all learned something that way. I think we all kind of learned to take responsibility as a result of that. And I don't think it really ever hurt any of us. And so we had Dick Reinking, Bulldog Year Out, and I had been told by our coach that Matty Bell, the coach at SMU, wanted us to come up and work out with them in the spring, and in lieu of maybe getting a scholarship. And we did that, and none of us got a scholarship, and I didn't find that out till July that he wasn't going to give us a scholarship, and so Ralph DeBoard and Bulldog and I decided that this war is going to be over before long. We got to get out there and get to it, and so we started deciding that we were going to be merchant seamen, and I'm not real sure why we decided that, except it ended up that there was 13 boys from Lancaster, that were merchant seamen during World War II. And it had really started a guy by the name of Kroll Mitchell, who was about 5 years older than I was. And he started going to sea before the war ever started, about a year before. And he had 2 years of college at the time. And I think that influenced us to go. But anyway, we signed up, and I think it was the 2nd or 3rd of August. Well, they shipped us off down to St. Petersburg, Florida for training, and supposed to have been 6 weeks, I think. And no, it was 6 weeks. I think it's supposed to have been 2 months. And then we shipped out. Bulldog and Ralph were both in the engine room. They'd been trained for the engine room. I'd been trained as a deckhand, so we parted ways there. And I caught a ship, the Helena Majeska, and went down through the canal. They caught it in New Orleans, went through the canal, across to the Admiralty Islands, New Guinea, and Australia twice, New Guinea about 4 or 5 times, the invasion of Borneo, and then we came back into San Pedro, and I think it was the day before, or the day after we got into San Pedro, that they dropped the first bomb, and then by the time I got back to Dallas, well, they said the war was over. But it wasn't for any of all of us merchant seamen, because we had to keep going or they'd draft you. I don't really understand that, but that's the way it was. But I kept going to sea. I was on 3 different tankers, 2 different cargo vessels. Went to Panama, to Colombia, Aruba, France, England 2 different times, and coastwise on tankers 2 or 3 times. And finally they said they were going to quit drafting, and so I went to Howard Payne then. And that's where I met this thing. So I don't know, that pretty well brings things up on. Well, one thing I didn't tell you about that football team that I didn't get to be on, and because I was in Denver, that Bub was captain and the quarterback on. They scored that year 532 points to their opponent's 6. They played out of their class every game. Every game was playing a higher classified team, except for the ones that were in their conference. They played 3. Back then they had double A's. That's the schools like Dallas and that kind. And the single A's, they were teams like, 5,000, 10,000 people. Now, and then B, which was what we were. And they played Arlington, which was a double A, and they beat them 19-6. That's the only points scored against them. They beat 3 A teams, and there was 3 games that year that they scored on the first play of the game, same play. And like I told you, they were so deep that, like I told you before, that John Dookie Reeves, a freshman, scored 3 touchdowns in one of those games, and he was the 3rd quarterback. I didn't say too that we won. Even those 2 teams I was on won the by-district, and Bub then won the by. They won the by-district 90-0. And But anyway, I know y'all think that's talking too much football, but football has always been a part of this family. Dad scored the first touchdown that the College of Marshall ever scored. In fact, it was the only score they scored that year. and and I mother had a brother that played football for Waco High School. They didn't he didn't have a high school he could go to back down there in Smith County, and he went down there and he broke his leg, and that ended his career. But and then Bill's gone on to been a coach for about 30 years and worked for the Dallas Cowboys for, well, I know it must be up in the 38 or something like that years now that he's worked for the Cowboys. Bub coached for 2 years, and he went back and played football at Howard Payne after the war was over. After he came back, he was in the 10th Mountain Division and got wounded over in Italy. And
what year was it in 2001 that Lancaster High School had a reunion homecoming?
I think it's two, I think. But
2002. But anyway, the four Hitt brothers that played football there they all came that year, and it was quite a to do because they, not just one or two, but all four of them that had been there. And it was the last time that the four brothers were together before Parky's
died since then.
Ben, needless to say, the youngest one.
Ben played football at Big Spring, but
not in Lancaster.
Yeah, no, I never did get to that on Dad after he came back and after he was lieutenant colonel at Randolph Field, but when you get that old and that low a rank, well, they kick you out, and so they made him get out of the service in 1947, and he immediately went into the chaplain service they sent him up to Little Rock. That was a mental hospital, and he took that for about 2 years, and he said he's afraid they're going to have to commit him to the place, and so they were opening a brand new hospital, Veterans Hospital at Big Spring, Texas, and they transferred him out there, and he was the only chaplain that they ever had there at that service until he retired, and they made him retire from the Veterans Administration because he was 70 years old. I mean, he never gave up. He never quit. And even after that, well, he preached up in Tin Cup for 3 or 4 years, and he kind of really got them to having real church services there, and then he substituted till he was about 80, I think, for other preachers.